Rain came down in sheets, the color of static, the kind that blurred the demarcation lines between the hab towers in the sky until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other started. Marin didn't mind. She'd been trained to find signal in static. She'd been trained, in fact, to find signal in almost anything. She was crouched on the upper deck of a maintenance scaffold 60 meters above the concourse, a black case open across her thighs, her fingers moving through a nest of sensor hardware the way a surgeon moves through viscera. Certain, economical, unhurried. The rain beaded on her jacket and ran off. Down on the concourse, the usual Friday crowd moved in their usual patterns, heads down, collars up, the neon of the food stalls painting their wet faces in colors that didn't exist in nature. "Feed's clean," said a voice in her earpiece. Low, precise, faintly amused. New assistant, Sable, working the relay from a hotel room 2 blocks north. "Thermal overlays up. You're good." Marin made a small adjustment to the primary lens and the image in her heads-up sharpened. 40 meters below, a woman in a gray coat paused at a noodle stall, tilted her head at the menu, ordered without looking at the vendor. Ordinary behavior. Logged, this was the job. In the parlance of the profession, such as it was, informal, unlicensed, almost entirely invisible to the regulatory bodies that nominally governed this sector, Marin was a watcher. Proper street term was tech, but she'd always hated it. It made her sound like a repairman. What she did was far more precise than repair, she observed. She recorded. She built from fragments of behavior and micro-expression and movement pattern a complete and irrefutable picture of what a person truly was when they believed they were unobserved. Clients paid extremely well for that picture. Her clients were almost always people who had something to lose. She had been at it for 11 years. She had never been wrong about a subject. The subject tonight was a woman named Covenant Delegate Thessaly Orvain, the third-tier attaché to the Accord Consulate, who had allegedly been passing route data for humanitarian convoys to an unknown third party. That was what her client, a gray, soft-spoken man named Administrator Vec, had told her. Convoys rerouted, aid not arriving, people suffering for it somewhere down the supply chain. It was the kind of contract Marin preferred, one where the subject deserved to be watched. She adjusted the lens again and noted the time. 34 minutes into the observation window. "She's moving," Sable said. Marin tracked. Orvain left the noodle stall without finishing her food. That was new behavior. Marin filed it, marked it with a timestamp. The woman crossed the concourse against the pedestrian flow, which was also new, and entered the service corridor at the northeast corner. Marin shifted to secondary camera, pulling up the corridor feed. "Thermal," said one body. "Moving fast now." "She knows she's being watched," Marin said quietly. "How can you tell?" "She didn't finish her food." A pause. "She always finishes her food." Sable had only been working with Marin for 3 weeks. She was young, mid-20s probably, though she never said, and she was good with hardware in a way that bordered on intuitive, but she still thought like someone who'd learned the work from tutorials rather than from the street. She was learning. Marin hadn't decided yet whether she was going to keep her. "Tagging her egress vector," Sable said. "She's heading toward the transit hub. Pull the hub feeds. All of them. Already running." Marin broke down the primary sensor rig in 11 seconds, standard time, and had the case locked and moving before the scaffold's motion sensor could register her departure. She took the maintenance ladder down 3 levels to the access corridor, jogged north. The rain was heavier here, channeled by the overhang geometry into a solid curtain along the corridor's edge. She put her head through it without slowing. Cold hit her like a hand. She was not thinking about Orvain. She was thinking about Vec. There had been something off about him from the start. The way he sat too still when he spoke, as though stillness was a performance he'd practiced. The way he'd known details about Marin's previous contracts. Not things that were in any public record, but private operational details that should not have been accessible. He'd specified the observation window down to the minute, as though he already knew what Orvain would be doing and simply needed it documented. Clients who already know the answer are not hiring you to find it. They're hiring you to make it real, to give it the weight of a recorded fact. She'd taken the contract anyway, because the alternative was turning it down and spending the rest of the week wondering what she'd missed. She reached the transit hub as the mag rail was closing its doors. Orvane was on the platform, had not boarded, was standing with her back to a support column and looking directly at the camera cluster above the ticket dispensers. Not at Marin, at the cameras. As if she knew precisely which ones were live and which were on a maintenance loop. She was right about which ones were on the loop. That was not public information. Marin stopped walking. The rail departed with a sound like a long breath released. The platform emptied, and then it was just the two of them, Orvane and Marin, 30 meters apart, the rain hammering the transit hub's polycarbonate canopy. And Orvane looked away from the camera cluster and directly at Marin. Not at the space around Marin, at Marin specifically. "She's made you," Sable said. "I know." "What do you want to do?" Marin didn't answer. She was studying Orvane's face, not her expression. The expression was controlled, purposeful. She was what the expression was doing to the musculature around her eyes, the microtelemetry of a face. Managing a feeling it wasn't ready to show. It was not the face of a woman who'd been caught. It was the face of a woman who had been waiting. Marin said, "Pull everything you have on Administrator Vec. Real name, origin, biometric registration, all of it. Now, that'll take. Now, Sable." She walked toward Orvane. The delegate didn't move. The rain kept hammering. When Marin got close enough to see her properly, to see the circles under her eyes, the faint tremor in her hands that she was barely suppressing, she understood that Orvane was afraid, not of Marin. "You're the tech he hired," Orvane said. "I'm not your enemy. You've been recording me for 6 weeks. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, delivered with a kind of tired patience that Marin recognized, the patience of someone who has run out of options and is making peace with whatever comes next. He needs the documentation to pull my credentials. Once I'm out of the consulate network, there's no one who can authorize the route corrections," Marin said. "What route corrections?" Orvane looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "The Accord isn't rerouting convoys to protect supply lines. It's rerouting convoys to starve the outer settlements, the ones that refuse to ratify the new compact." She paused. "Vec doesn't work for the Accord. He works for the faction that's been pushing the compact. Shh. I've been filing corrections to the route data for 3 months. That's why he needs me gone. He told me you were the one diverting convoys. He told you what would make you look at me instead of him." Marin stood very still. Somewhere in her earpiece she could hear Sable typing. Fast, faster than she usually typed. "I've got Vec's registration," Sable said quietly. "It's Marin. This is a Conclave ID. He's not Accord administration. He's a deep logistics coordinator for the Provisional Hegemony faction." Marin didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you been documenting the route manipulations?" Orvane reached into her coat and produced a data chip, small and matte and unremarkable. 3 months. Every manipulation, every authorization key, every comms handshake. I've been building a record. Why not take it to the Accord Oversight Board directly? Because the 2 Oversight Board members for this sector both have hegemony faction ties. I've been trying to find a path that doesn't go through them. She held out the chip. "I need someone to copy this and get it to the independent press. Someone who knows how to move data without it being intercepted." Marin looked at the chip. She looked at Orvane's face. The circles under the eyes. The hands that wouldn't quite hold still. She looked at the empty platform and the rain and the transit hub's cameras, most of which were on maintenance loops that she herself had confirmed when she'd set up the observation rig. She should have walked away. Professional calculus was straightforward. She was a watcher, not a courier, and inserting herself into factional politics was the fastest possible way to become the kind of problem that got solved permanently. She took the chip. "I'm going to need everything you know about Vec's operational setup," she said. "Safe houses, relay nodes, any names you have. And I need you somewhere he can't reach you while I work." Orvane said, "I know where to go." And then quietly, "Why are you doing this?" Marin pocketed the chip and looked out at the rain. Somewhere out beyond the transit hub's canopy, out past the hab towers and the neon and the wet gray sprawl of the city, there were settlements running low on food because someone was manipulating route data from a warm office. She thought about that. She thought about the specific, tedious, bureaucratic malice of it. Not the dramatic violence of conquest, but the slow, administrative murder of redirected logistics. 'Cause the alternative, she said, is doing nothing. It took her 4 hours to copy the chip's contents to 3 separate dead drops. One in the financial district's public data commons, one embedded in the metadata of a recipe post on a public cooking forum. She had used this particular method 6 times, and it had never been intercepted, and one transmitted to a journalist she had worked with twice before, a woman named Korik, who worked for an independent broadcast network and who had the stubborn, tireless quality of someone who genuinely believed that the truth mattered. Moran didn't share that belief exactly, but she respected the utility of it. While she worked, Sable ran Vec's movements. He had predictably not gone home after their last meeting. He was mobile, which meant he knew something had changed, or suspected it. 3 confirmed locations in 4 hours, a logistics hub in the Eastern District, a private comms suite near the ferry terminal, and a vehicle that was currently moving through the southern residential grid at a speed that suggested it was looking for something. He's sweeping, Marin said. Sweeping for you or for Orvain? Both probably. He's cleaning up. She looked at her hands. They were steady, which she took as a good sign about her decision-making, even if it told her nothing useful about her survival prospects. Where's Orvain? Safe house in the Old Port District. She pinged me 30 minutes ago. Keep checking her. Sable was quiet for a moment. Then, Marin, what's the play here? 2 techs who just burned a contract and sat on evidence about a political conspiracy. This isn't what we do. It's what we're doing tonight. That's not actually an answer. Marin closed the last dead drop, leaned back in her chair, and looked at the ceiling of the relay room she'd rented for the night. Bare concrete, a single overhead light, the smell of old electrical work. She was not, she reflected, a person who made dramatic decisions. She was a person who made precise ones. Precision and drama were not, it turned out, mutually exclusive. What we do, she said, is find the truth of a thing. We watch people until they show us what they really are when they think no one's looking. She paused. I watched Vec for 3 weeks and I didn't see what he was. I watched the wrong person. She stopped. I'd like to correct that, by going after him, by making sure the record exists and can't be scrubbed. A pause. Going after him would be dangerous and unnecessary and probably fatal. A silence. You're going to go after him, Sable said. Probably yes. It was not, in the end, about going after him directly. Shh. Marin had been doing this long enough to understand that direct confrontation was the strategy of people who hadn't thought it through. Vec was a deep logistics coordinator for a faction with significant resources. He had probably 3 or 4 layers of operational security between himself and any physical consequence, plus whatever local enforcement assets he'd cultivated over the years of this operation. She was a surveillance tech with a data chip and a recently hired assistant. The advantage she had was the one she always had. She knew how to watch. She spent the rest of the night building a net. Not a physical one. She had none of the equipment for that, and she'd have been insane to try. A data net. She pulled every publicly accessible node in Vec's known operational area. The comms suite near the ferry terminal, the logistics hub, the vehicle, and she mapped the traffic patterns. She was looking for repetition, for the specific shape of habit. Because habit was the great enemy of operational security, and no one, not ever, was disciplined enough to fully eliminate it. She found it at 3 in the morning, every 90 seconds. She noted the irony, or perhaps it was a deliberate echo of something she didn't consciously understand. A packet of encrypted traffic passed between the ferry terminal comms suite and a relay node she traced to a building in the administrative district. The building contained, among other things, the sector's Transit Authority routing center, the routing center that Orvain had been filing corrections against. The traffic wasn't passing data. It was a keep-alive signal, the kind of signal that said, I'm still here, everything is still running, don't shut it down. Convoy rerouting was automated. It had been automated for months, probably since Orvain first started filing corrections. Vec wasn't manually diverting convoys anymore. He'd set up a process that did it for him, checking in every 90 seconds to maintain the rerouting parameters. and Orvane's corrections, had been fighting the automation the entire time. She'd thought she was fighting a man. And the keep alive only worked if the comm suite was live. Marin sat with that for a long moment. She thought about what she was good at. She thought about what she was about to do and whether it was the kind of thing she was equipped for. She thought about those settlements running low on food. She thought about the quiet, grind-on patience of Orvane standing on that platform in the rain, waiting to be caught, waiting for someone to not be another piece of the machine. She's called Sable. I need you to do something that's arguably more illegal than anything we've done tonight. Arguably, Sable said. Not a question. Just repeating the word back to her, turning it over, tasting its limits. I need you to inject a loop into the keep alive signal coming out of the ferry terminal suite. Make the routing sensor receiver think the signal is still live. Then I need you to pull Vex authentication key from the same traffic stream. It'll be in the header data. It's always in the header. And use it to file a full system reset on the routing parameters. Turn everything to default. A silence. Long enough that Marin wondered if she'd miscalculated. That's, Sable said slowly, extraordinarily elegant. Thank you. It's also going to take me about 20 minutes, and it's going to require me to touch 4 separate secured government systems. I know. And if it works, the convoy routes reset to default, which means the next departures roll on corrected routes. Right. Another silence. And Vex keep alive loop goes dead when the real signal stops because I've cut the suite's outgoing traffic. Right. Which means the automation knows the suite is down and does what? Tries to re-establish. Fails. Triggers a system alert at the routing center that flags the entire rerouting operation as unauthorized. At which point the oversight board is going to have a very hard time explaining why an unauthorized rerouting process with a hegemony faction authentication key has been running for 3 months. A pause. Especially since the independent press is going to receive Orvane's documentation in about 8 hours. Sable was quiet for a moment. Then, you planned this while you were copying the chip. I planned it while I was walking to the transit hub. That's a short sound that might have been a laugh. Okay. Give me 20 minutes. She sat in the relay room and listened to the city. The rain had eased to a drizzle. Somewhere below, someone was arguing in the street. 2 voices raised, then quieting, then gone. The overhead light flickered once, found its frequency, held. Marin thought about Orvane's hands. Tremor she'd been suppressing for 3 months, probably. The specific exhaustion of being right and being ignored and continuing anyway. Marin had a sister. She didn't think about her often, because thinking about her was unproductive and slightly painful. The way prodding a bruise is unproductive and slightly painful. Her sister did not work in surveillance. She worked in convoy logistics. She had, for about 2 years now, been stationed at a distribution hub in one of the outer settlements. Marin had not told Sable this. She wasn't going to. But she thought about it now, in the relay room, while the city dripped outside. She thought about her sister's face. The same quality of stubborn patience as Orvane's. As it happened. Though for entirely different reasons. And she thought about the specific quiet satisfaction of doing a thing that needed doing because it needed doing, regardless of what it cost. From an old piece of field doctrine that her first supervisor had made her memorize. She'd memorized everything that woman gave her. She'd been 17 and very eager and a little frightened. The line was, "The watcher's job is not to change what is seen, only to record it." She had believed that for a long time. It was clean doctrine. It was professionally sustainable. It let you sleep. She'd been wrong about it for 11 years, and she'd only just noticed. "Done," Sable said. Marin blinked. "Already?" 17 minutes. I'm fast when the stakes are right. A pause. The loop's running. His authentication key filed the reset 4 minutes ago. Routing parameters are back to default. Keep alive traffic from the suite is dark. Another pause, shorter. I'm watching the routing center alert system. They're going to flag it in approximately. A sound from Sable's end. Something between a breath and a word. They flagged it, Sable said. Oklot's process. Hegemony faction credentials. They're escalating. Marin let out a long, slow breath. And the convoys? She said. 3 departures are on corrected routes. Marin Sable stopped. The first one was already staged to leave. It just rolled. Marin sat with that for a moment, a convoy rolling, food moving. Someone in an outer settlement who would receive a shipment they'd stopped expecting. She didn't know her sister's specific hub. She didn't know if it was one of the affected settlements. The math of it was too big, too distributed, too diffuse for her to track to a single face. But she could feel the shape of it, the way you can sometimes feel the shape of a correction, the specific, almost physical sensation of something returning to where it was supposed to be. Good, she said. It was a small for what she meant, but it was the right one. Vec came for her at dawn. She'd known he would. She'd known it from the moment she'd looped the keep alive. Not because she'd made a mistake, but because she'd made a very visible move in someone else's game, and the correct response from a man like Vec was to treat it as a provocation. He sent two people, which told her he'd either underestimated her, or he was testing how much trouble she was worth before committing more resources. She'd moved from the relay room at 4 in the morning, leaving behind a repeating comm ping that suggested she was still there. She was 2 streets over, in the service corridor, above a laundry facility, when she watched on her handheld scope as the two people Vec had sent let themselves into the relay room, found it empty, and spent 6 minutes looking for something that wasn't there, recorded all of it. Because that was what she did. The footage was on its way to Korik before the two operatives made it back to street level. 16 minutes of video showing two people with hegemony faction credentials breaking into a licensed relay facility, looking for evidence of the disruption of their unauthorized routing operation. It was not, on its own, conclusive, but it was another weight on the scale, and the scale was tipping. Pulling back, Sable said. The vehicle I was tracking, it's gone dark. No movement in the last 40 minutes. He's recalculating, Marin said. He's gone to ground. Same thing at this stage. She watched the two operative disappear into the pre-dawn foot traffic. Just 2 more shapes in a city full of shapes. Flag every node they touched on their way in. Want to map their route back. To find where they came from? To find where they go when they're scared. Sable laughed. A real one this time, not the almost law from before. It was a young sound. It reminded Marin that she was in fact young, that she'd walked into a situation tonight that most experienced techs would have walked away from. And she'd stayed, and she'd done extraordinary work. And she deserved to know that. You did good tonight, Marin said. Not with warmth exactly. Warmth wasn't her primary register. With the particular directness of someone who doesn't say things she doesn't mean, which Sable was learning to read. Pause. Thanks, Sable said, quietly. Not embarrassed, just receiving it. By mid-morning, the routing center alert had been escalated twice. Early afternoon, it had reached the independent oversight review body, not the sector board with the hegemony faction ties, but the higher-level body that those sector members didn't have access to. By early evening, Korik's network was running a 40-minute investigative piece. Marin watched it from a different district entirely, sitting in a food stall with a bowl of noodles she was actually going to finish, her equipment case under the table, and her comm set to silent. Peace was good. Chorik was good. She laid out the documentation cleanly, traced the route manipulations to specific authorization keys, named the hegemony faction's logistics operation without hedging. She had a source she identified only as a former contractor with direct access to the rerouting operation. That was Marin. Though Marin had sent everything through 3 layers of anonymization, she also had Orvain on camera, briefly, not identified, just a shape in a dark room saying they needed the outer settlements desperate. Desperate people ratify compacts they wouldn't otherwise touch. Marin ate her noodles. The city moved around her. 2 kids in school uniforms were arguing over something on a shared screen at the next table. A vendor across the way was singing to himself badly, cheerfully, a song that Marin didn't recognize, but that had the cadence of something she'd heard her sister singing once, years ago, in a kitchen that no longer existed. She let herself notice it. She let it sit. Comm lit up with a message from Sable. Vec's vehicle just showed at the Transit Authority. He's filing a counter-complaint. He's going to try to claim the reset was a hostile act by Accord Elements. Marin typed back. He can file whatever he wants. The authentication key was his. That's not going anywhere, a pause. Then, what happens to him? Marin looked at the food stall's canopy, water still dripping from its edge in the last of the day's rain. That's not our job. Our job was to make the record. She thought about it. Someone else decides what to do with the record, and if they decide wrong. Marin set down her chopsticks. She thought about Orvain in a safe house in the Old Port district. Finally sleeping, probably finally not running calculations about which cameras were on maintenance loops and which routes were safe. She thought about convoys rolling on corrected courses. She thought about her sister's settlement, and whether the timing was right, and whether she should call. She probably would. Then we make a better record, she typed. She could almost hear Sable turning that over. Okay, Sable typed back. Marin picked up her chopsticks and finished her food. 3 days later, 2 members of the Sector Oversight Board were suspended pending investigation. The Hegemony Faction's logistics coordinator, Vec, real name something longer and bureaucratically banal, that Korak had obtained through official channels, was placed under regulatory detain. The convoy routes remained corrected. Shipments arrived. Marin did not celebrate this. She was not by nature or training a celebrator, but she sat with it for a while. She turned it over. She let it have the weight it deserved. She was in a new relay room, a better one, higher up, with a window that looked northeast toward the part of the city where the HAB towers thinned out, and you could see the infrastructure of the distribution network. The elevated rail lines, the loading platforms, the slow movement of freight in the middle distance. She watched the way she watched everything, methodically, with attention, looking for the signal in the pattern. Sable came in around noon with 2 coffees. She set one on the table near Marin, without being asked, which meant she was learning. She stood at the window for a moment and looked at the same view. I've been thinking, Sable said. Don't stop on my account. About what you said, about correcting the record. A pause. There's a lot of record that needs correcting. Marin looked at her. 20-something. Dark circles from 3 nights of irregular sleep. A jacket with a fraying cuff she'd been unconsciously tugging at for the last 3 days, whenever she was thinking hard. Smart. Genuinely smart. Not just technically, but in the way that mattered more. The willingness to look at a thing and see what was actually there, not what was convenient. Yes, Marin said. There is. So we're going to have more nights like this. Probably. Nights where we watch something and decide it needs more than watching. Marin picked up the coffee. It was hot and slightly bitter the way she preferred it. Outside, a freight car moved along the elevated rail at the unhurried pace of logistics that was working the way it was supposed to work. She watched it until it was out of sight. We watch, she said, and then we decide. That's always been the job. She turned from the window. Part I got wrong for 11 years was thinking those were 2 separate things. Sable nodded. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, should have done this sooner. Yes, Marin said. We should have. She picked up her case. She had 3 new contracts waiting. Legitimate ones, boring ones. Exactly the kind of work she'd spent 11 years doing before last Friday. She was going to take all 3. She was going to do them carefully and well. And she was going to watch them with the particular attention of someone now who understood that the distance between observer and participant had always been smaller than she'd been taught. The record existed. The convoys were running. Somewhere northeast of the city, in a settlement that had spent 3 months receiving less than it needed. People were receiving what they needed. Put her comm in her pocket. She picked up the case. She walked toward the door. Marin, Sable said. She turned. Sable was still at the window, coffee in hand, looking at the freight rail. Not at Marin. You said you'd never been wrong about a subject. A beat. In 11 years. That's right. Were you wrong about Orvain? Marin considered that. She thought about the way she'd characterized the job when Vec gave her the brief. A surveillance expert taking on an assignment for a wealthy client. She'd assessed the subject with the tools she had. She'd built a picture. The picture had been technically accurate. Every data point she'd recorded was real, verifiable, defensible. But it had been framed by someone who wanted it to look like something it wasn't. And she'd accepted the framing without questioning it. I wasn't wrong about Orvain, she said finally. I was wrong about what I was looking at. She held that thought. Let it sit where it could do something useful. Then she pulled the door open and walked into the corridor. And the freight kept moving on the rail outside, and the record was intact. And that was enough. For now.